Welcome, everyone. So glad you're able to join us for HDL's latest California sales tax trends and forecast webinar. Three of us, myself, Bobby Young, Client Services Director here for HDL California, Ken Brown and Susie Woodstock, fellow principals on our sales tax team. Many of you have seen them in your meetings. You're going to see them coming up in the next couple of months as we all roll out the latest agency specific sales tax news. So the three of us have the honor to present today. For those of you who don't know a little bit about HDL, we continue this year to celebrate our 40th year of service here in California. We are 100% employee owned. It gives all of us the ability to really put into the good work that we do on behalf of all of our clients. Overall, we've generated in excess of $3 billion for clients. And most recently, some good news and exciting news for us on the HDL front. We are not just a California company. We've expanded and now stretch from coast to coast nationally as a company, as a firm, serving local governments. And you can see here our total number in excess of 700 now that we have the privilege of serving. And we are extremely blessed to have an overall client retention rate in excess of 99%. And so happy to be able to provide our clients with good information and kind of keep you up to speed, provide you what you need to make your jobs hopefully a little bit easier. So let's jump right in. You can see on the screen here our 2Q23 statewide results, 2Q second quarter calendar year, April, May, June time period, right there at the beginning of the summer months, kind of frame that up. What we had, I mean, overall, the economy was still doing well. Obviously, we are going to see some negatives on the screen, much like we did last quarter with the first quarter calendar year, first quarter of 2023. But here, 2Q overall down 2.8%. Not overall shocking by any stretch. We were able to just last quarter, we were thinking that 2Q was going to land at about 2.5% decrease over the prior year. We ended up at 2.8. A couple of items that you see here on the screen that we've highlighted in red, and you're probably going to hear a lot about, especially if your agency is heavy on building and construction and fuel and service. Ken Brown, unfortunately, gets the honor of talking about the negatives or the declines this quarter. So I'm going to save just a little bit, but kind of that teaser is think weather and also the comparisons, what was going on with prior year. Such a big part of the story now as we traverse through 2023 is, hey, remember what was going on back in 2022. The green ones here, you'll see actually, and Susie gets the honor of presenting some good positive increases over on the business and industry side and restaurants. Restaurants have been phenomenal. We continue that trend. So great news to come that you'll hear from Susie. On the right side of the screen here, you can see now pretty much every region within the state, unfortunately, pulling back just a little bit, very softly from prior year. And we would even kind of lead in to say, it's fairly flat. It's a slowdown. Not so much of the threat yet of calling a recession or feeling that big declines, comparatively speaking. So that's what we've got for you today. Overall statewide 2.8% decrease. When we sat around the table just earlier this month and kind of looked at all the data, tried to really think, hey, what are the big points that we need to really focus on to help discuss it with you, but then also as we look at and consider our future forecasts. Obviously, inflation and prices, also think gas and what we're experiencing today with regards to gas prices, supply chain on many different fronts. I think Ken's going to be talking a little bit about on the autos and kind of, potential work stoppage or kind of some negotiations that are going to be happening and how that's going to affect the supply chain. So we really leaned in heavy on those fronts. Obviously, there's no avoiding overall what interest rates have looked like and what we've been experiencing and how the feds have been continuing to increase, and thereby what does that mean for mortgage rates, And then as consumers, obviously here you got gas prices that all of us are feeling the crunch on, and how that's going to continue to steal a little bit of our incomes, but then also our savings. Got a slide for you coming up here to kind of work through that, and inevitably, what does it mean for us in California, consumers, and how they're going to continue to spend. Right up front, reiterating Feds and interest rates. You can see here we're at 525 basis points overall. Thankfully enough, just last week, as the Feds came out from their September meeting, did not touch interest rates, even though they have a total of 11 times, is what you see on the screen here, from March of 2022 to July of 23, 11 times raising the interest rates there, or the Fed funds rate. Um, but as a part of the notes coming out, they still they're comfortable maintaining somewhere between 525 and 550 basis points. So it's probably a good lead in. I think we would all say, yeah, if the Feds don't touch the Fed funds rate going forward, it's probably a good thing overall for the economy and for us as consumers. So we continue to watch that. The next meeting is at the end of October, beginning of November, October 31st through 11th, November 1st. So more information to come on the interest rate side. Consumer spending, we've got some lines here. You'll see durable goods is this light green, and how it peaked out there after the pandemic during 2021 calendar year, and how much it's traversed off. We've got I think percentage change, yes, percentage growth here on as far as the scale goes. And we're kind of right here as we go through calendar year 23. So you can see, yep, it's gonna, as far as consumer spending goes, gonna be pulling back just a little bit. This line here as I go across is 0%, but then flattening out going forward. The part that has really kicked up is the non-durable goods. And even that, as we look forward, it's got some growth in it, but probably going to be flattening overall, with services being the light gray, fairly consistent as we look forward. Savings and disposable income overall, this is still a great comparison, because during the pandemic, folks were able to save at very high rates. You can see double digit overall. And now here we are, still trailing back households and overall savings with where we were pre-pandemic. So this is kind of leading into that potential headwind of what's going to be available for folks as we get through 2022, even looking into 2024. Overall unemployment, again, great barometer just for perspective of where unemployment sits in relation to pre-pandemic, going back to the Great Recession or during the pandemic. Still extremely low. As of August, we had an statewide unemployment rate of 4.6%. So really anything below 5%, which obviously it's a little difficult, but it's right about this marker here. Still historically low unemployment rate, which is the balance point for what we obviously feel as headwinds coming or sustaining with interest rates and inflation and supply chain interruptions and other things. Is like there's still folks that are working and jobs that are available should people choose, and thereby the inevitable hope for us, which is sales tax is still going to get generated. We're not expecting really big pullback. So those are some of kind of the bigger points here on the screen. You see middle of the road with 2.8% decline this quarter. As I made mention, last quarter we saw a 1.6% pullback. So still fairly consistent, and again, soften. Our forecast looking forward and what we think is going to happen for the rest of the calendar year is still more declines to come. About a 2.5% reduction in 3Q, 1.6% come 4Q in the normal holiday shopping period. Once we get through this, though, you can see is that brief look to the right here, returning to more expected positive growth, momentum get through a November 24 election, which is starting to now highlight for a lot of folks, especially here in California. But it is dramatically different. We can't. There's no avoiding that for where we were at the end of 2021, beginning of 2022. A lot of this is still that comparison period, and why I say it's so tight when, hey, it's just from where we've come from. We still saw an 8% gain in third quarter 22. So that again is likely going to be part of the conversation when as we go forward and talk about, it's a pullback, but remember we had tremendous gains previously. Then really quick, what does it look like from a place of sale comparison with the pools? You can see the last 3 quarters have definitely been softening on the pools. I'll let Susie talk about that a little bit later. And now we see a little bit bigger declines out of place of sale. Fuel building going to be a part of that. At this point, I'll turn it over to my colleague Ken Brown to talk about autos.
Great. Thank you so much, Bobby. Yeah, autos. Autos was down again for the second consecutive quarter, actually tracking very closely to our expectations. We came in down 1.4%. We had expected a decrease of about 2%. So actually a little bit better than what we had been thinking it actually could happen. Here is something, though, this chart, I think this is really interesting, something that will provide, despite all the challenges I'm going to talk about in the upcoming slides facing the auto industry, one major thing that I think will provide some support for the industry going forward. And that's basically this. If you look at this graph over on the right-hand side of the screen, we are actually at a level of sales that, while yes, it's recovered quite a bit from the recessionary levels that we were during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've come back up, but we're still pretty far below what I would call normal years, sort of the 2014 through 2019 or the 2002, 2006 years. So the point here is that despite all the challenges I'm going to talk about, there actually is going to be some support provided to the market because of this. Now, one of the major reasons why we are down in sales and have been down in sales is frankly a lack of inventory. And so you see on this slide here, that has caused a tremendous surge in pricing over time. We've talked about this in many of our meetings and our previous webinars. And so I think my point here, still an impact, but the pricing pressures are sort of reverting back to what we consider more typical. So in this case, we had this huge surge. We're still up in new cars. We're up 4.7%. But as inventory levels slowly rebuild from the pandemic, we're not up at the same rate, like 12% where we had been in terms of year-over-year increases. And used cars, we actually did a round trip here. We went way, way up, even more magnified than what we saw with the new car market, came way back down. We're actually a little bit negative on a year-over-year basis, but as you can see, even here, we're trending back towards a more normal level of price stability. Of course, now that inventory is finally coming back a little bit and helping to ameliorate some of the pricing pressures, we got a lot of other stuff going on too. So one of the big headwinds right now is, of course, financing rates. My goodness, financing rates for a car now up 7% to 7% compared to maybe about 4% just a year ago. And so these cars are already expensive, and you add on top of that a 7% rate of interest on your loan, and you're looking at car payments now at a level of about $733 on average in the United States. So that's a pretty hefty, cost for a family these days. Interesting to me to see how expensive cars are. Used to be a couple years ago, you could find maybe a dozen vehicles selling for under 20K. Now there is only one. You got a picture of it right here on your screen, the Mitsubishi Mirage, the only car available for sale for under 20K. And from what I understand, it is going out of production soon. So not too much longer, and we're not even going to have a car that you can buy for under 20K. The good news, I guess, is that there are starting to be a few cars available for sale under sticker price, under MSRP, but not a lot of them. You can see here the pricing is pretty high, 51K, 84K. So the average price of a car these days is about 48K. But if you're looking at a deal, looking for a deal, I guess the best right now, according to the latest stats, 1.9% off the Chrysler Pacifica Hybrid. So it's something, it's not a lot, but at least it's some kind of discount. Summing it all up, in terms of recent trends, vehicle sales were up, I think in California, about 17% in the second quarter. And from what I'm seeing looking ahead to the third quarter to come, nationally, we're seeing data trending in the neighborhood of a 15% gain. The bad news here, over here, fleet sales is a good chunk of that. So what does that mean in terms of sales tax revenues? So yes, it's good when sales volume goes up, but if those sales are to rental car agencies, and a lot of rental car agencies right now are rebuilding their fleets, typically what happens with the sales tax on those is that the sales tax is paid not at the point of acquisition, but instead on a day-to-day basis when those cars are rented out to the customer. And so there may not be that immediate boost in sales tax revenue. So some of this growth we're seeing in sales right now is really related more to fleet sales. But the good news is that pricing, at least on the new car side, is still a positive. The negatives we already talked about. We talked about financing rates higher than 7%, leading to monthly payments somewhere around $730. And then, of course, Bobby alluded to it, and we've heard about it in the news. The United Auto Workers recently, I think maybe within the last week or two, decided to strike. And so that has the potential, it's something we're watching closely, to sort of have the same impact we saw during the pandemic, where there wasn't a lot of inventory, because this could curtail inventory and therefore result in even higher prices from what we're seeing right now, which are already pretty darn high. Now, not on this chart, a couple of things that will support the industry going forward. I already mentioned below normal auto sales right now, even now. So we're at slightly below normal. That'll provide some cushion. But also the fact, and I mentioned this last 3 months ago in our presentation, the average age of an automobile in the United States is now 12 and a half years old. That is a record high. So a couple forces there, even though we see some near-term challenges, a couple forces that will be supportive of the industry, at least in the intermediate and long term. So in terms of our forecast, we're looking at, after the two recent quarters where we've been down a little bit, we're looking at a couple more quarters of some modest declines here before beginning to rebound. And then eventually, beyond what you see here back in fiscal year 25-26, we expect that sales will, tax receipts in this category will grow somewhere around more normal levels, 3.5 to 4%. So short term, a little bit of modest dip similar to what we're seeing, and then a slow return to normal. We're going to talk about gasoline next. And so we've all been paying pretty high prices at the pump lately. And so it may be a surprise to you to see that actually, when you look at the second quarter results for your agency, you may see a dip in tax receipts for this category somewhere around 20%, which is what we saw statewide. And so pretty surprising given what we're all paying at the pump. But remember, as Bobby mentioned, a lot of this, we're looking at comparisons to a very high period last year. And if you put your mind back to what happened a year ago, and you see this period of time here circled in this yellow box, this is not too long after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February. And so that certainly produced a lot of fear and a spike in the market. And so as we sit here today, we're down compared to that peak period, but we're ticking up. And interestingly to me, this graph only goes through like early September, but I had to look it up yesterday. We're just above on the graph, I think about $5 a gallon. We're now statewide $5.89. The market moved really quick, like within the last week or so. Oil prices, my goodness, shot up, I think $93 a barrel yesterday. And so that's certainly a factor. Basically, what's going on is OPEC made production cuts in early July, and that has held the level of supply inventory just a little bit below demand, so that there are some recent upward pressures on pricing. Now, interestingly enough, despite that, there has been a little bit of a dip in consumption compared to last year. Some of that, I think, was the reason for OPEC making its move. They saw that coming. One of those things, travel, right? Travel, we all traveled coming out of the pandemic. At least in the United States, though, now there's a bit of a shift from travel in the United States now to Europe, other places overseas, and so maybe not so much consumption here in the United States. We're hearing about Airbnb rentals here in the United States being half full or maybe even less compared to fully occupied last year. Even though there's a ton of people on flying on the airlines, we're hearing that there's a shortage of pilots and maybe there's not more planes in the air, just more airlines doing a great job of maximizing passengers on the airplanes that are flying. And so consumption is down a little bit, despite what we've seen. Also, rainy weather in terms of our forecast. We're expecting another potential wet winter with the El Nino conditions this year, perhaps as rainy as last year. And so we're considering that as well in terms of our forecast, that could also curtail consumption just a little bit. So all in all, we're looking at some continued drops, but then of course a rebound with the high prices we're seeing now, and then eventually returning to more normal inflationary rates of growth for this commodity category into the future. Now, building and construction, this was the category of most interest to me this quarter. We saw a pretty big dip last quarter, down 10%. And certainly a large part of that we thought was due to weather, and I think it was. This quarter, we were down again, though. We were down 5.6%, not quite as much of a dip, but still down after that large dip in the weather impacted first quarter. So we did see some recovery from that. We saw concrete asphalt sales generally up statewide. Contractor results were lower and lumber prices, once again, lower about 42% compared to last year. So four of the main factors that we're going to be looking at in terms of our forecast going forward, and that which I will elaborate a little bit on. Lumber, that's a big part of the story. I've got a slide for you on that coming up. Also, of course, the weather, as I mentioned. Interest rates, the highest they've been in 20 years. And then finally, also interesting to me, affordability in terms of homes, housing. So real quick, in terms of lumber, you see this graph here. This is where we are now. And so the good news is we have sort of stabilized in lumber prices, much like we're seeing with car pricing right now as well. But we are still down compared to where we were in August. So there is going to continue to be a bit of a short-term impact on the building construction sector in terms of lumber pricing. But going forward, it's going to have a short-term impact. And then going forward, it won't be as much of an issue considering the market remains in a similar zone. Affordability. Wow. Home prices are so high, and that's even before 7% mortgage rates that, we got spoiled with sub 3%, I think, in some cases a couple years ago. So 7%. But even before that, home pricing very expensive. And I tried to find a good chart. This was the best one I could find. It's comprehensive. It includes UK as well, but it's basically showing you home price versus median household income ratio. And if you look over here on the right, very interesting, we are basically at the same point we were during the housing bubble. So housing prices, very expensive, even not even factoring in higher interest rates. So that's certainly a factor in terms of forecasting. But it's important to remember that a lot of this is due to lack of inventory, particularly in desirable places to live like California. There's just not enough housing, but certainly a factor. And so when we look at our forecast, as you see here, we're looking at lumber prices and weather in the short term. We're looking at higher mortgage rates in the short to intermediate term, and then affordability, an ongoing issue. Beyond that, we see receipts stabilizing. We, as I mentioned, believe that there's a tremendous undersupply of homes and also a tremendous demand for infrastructure in California. Food and drugs came in like some of the other categories, just a little lower than expectations. We were down 1.6%, mostly due to the liquor and convenience store category. While it's not down as quite as much in percentage terms as some of these others like cannabis, it is the most impactful category because it's the largest. And so a lot of what's going on there is that folks are now eating out in restaurants again. And so, as Susie will talk about, they're not consuming as much alcohol at home, instead, going out, entertainment venues as well, and enjoying being out with others and celebrating major life events. Cannabis also down, has been trending down on oversupply and some other issues for a period of time. Some of these impacts we think are going to start to ameliorate. We've seen these impacts now for 4 quarters plus, and we think that going forward, we think that we'll see growth rates more in the 2% range, similar to sort of a low rate of inflation that we might expect in this category. And so with that, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Susie.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I'm going to start with the general consumer goods group. General consumer goods contracted 4.8% in second quarter. It was projected to only contract about 2.4%. This slide shows the major categories that were decreasing. The top category, discount department stores, is 31% of the general consumer goods group, and you can see it was down 5.9%. So contributing to that the bigger drop that we saw. Discount department stores has several taxpayers that roll in their fuel pumps into their main account. So lower gas prices does have some impact on discount department stores, but most major retailers were reporting lower comparable sales and expect modest declines through the rest of 2023. Target has lowered their expectations for this year, and Walmart reports softness in their general merchandise. Also on this slide, we see some big declines in the home furnishing categories. This is due to soft demand for some of the big ticket items, but it's also because there were some store closures in this category. Another group here, family apparel, it was negative, but it actually was better than what we expected it to be. And this is because off-price concepts like TJ Maxx are seeing increased foot traffic in their stores. TJ Maxx reports that they were extremely pleased with their second quarter results and reported an increase in their traffic to their stores. Okay, we'll factor out discount department stores entirely and look at the other high impact categories in the general consumer goods group. These categories have seen 4 consecutive quarters of negative decline, as you can see here with this solid line. A tightening economy fueled by inflation and higher borrowing costs have reduced the demand for some of these durable goods. A larger proportion of consumer spending is shifting back to non-taxable services and experiences. The dashed line is showing the outlook for higher impact. For the high impact categories, expects negative results through the first quarter of 24, and then some mild growth beginning in spring. So rolling that information into the forecast for general consumer goods shows that we expect spending to continue to decline for the next 3 quarters. Reuters suggests retailers are set to hire the lowest level of seasonal holiday workers in 15 years, which is reflected in this fourth quarter of a 2% decline. But then starting to see modest growth next year in second quarter and about 1.5% growth going forward. Okay, now we'll move into the major industry group, the countywide pools. In this first slide, we're looking at general consumer goods portion compared to the rest of the categories in the pool. This general consumer goods, which is the teal line, had that big jump beginning in 4Q19 with the implementation of AB 147, the Marketplace Facilitator Act, and those gains were furthered by the pandemic frenzy. But then the allocation decreases. This occurred because companies increased the use of in-state fulfillment centers, changing the reporting from this indirect method via the pools to direct allocation to agencies where the fulfillment centers are located. The fulfillment centers will show up in the business and industry group, so we'll talk about that in a few slides. I know you've heard about this before. The spike in decline happened back in 2019 and 2021, but the last 3 quarters here, the teal line starts to show some big decreases again as more online shopping is being sourced within the state. The blue line on this, all the other major industry groups, this has really been the primary factor driving the growth in the pool since 2Q21. So here, the next slide, we're going to look at a way to further illustrate the growing utilization of in-state fulfillment centers. The top line here is the online shopping that is distributed via the pool, and the teal is the online shopping that is distributed by a direct allocation to a fulfillment center location. In 1Q18, 78% of online shopping was being distributed via the pool method. In second quarter of 23, only 59% is being distributed through the pool and 41% is being distributed to direct allocations to the fulfillment center locations. So this really illustrates that it's not a decline in general consumer good purchases in the pool, it's that shift between distribution through the pool method and distribution of a direct allocation to the fulfillment centers. So again, general consumer goods is not the only major industry group type in the pools. The pools has autos and transportation, which this is mainly private party used cars sales that the sales tax is distributed through the pool. There's building and construction and business and industry. Business and industry is almost as big of a portion as general consumer goods. And in this quarter, second quarter, it was up 5%. Also in the pools is restaurants and hotels. Restaurants and hotels are not in the pool because it's coming from out of state. They're in the pool because delivery services are offering full service delivery options for restaurants. But when the delivery service takes the order, they do not own the merchandise at the time it's ordered, and so it ends up being distributed through the pool. It's not a big portion of the pool, but it is about 3.5% of statewide restaurant sales tax that moved from direct allocation to the restaurants to this pool indirect allocation method. And then we'll look a little bit closer at the top 10 business types in the pool. General merchandise here, this is where most of the online sales are. So we've already talked about that is contracting. Used auto dealers can mention that the prices of used autos are coming down, and you can see that the private party sales is also reflecting that here. And then there was a couple of categories that had some big growth. We see receivables and energy. Energy was in that business and industry group that had the 5% gains. It fluctuates a bit, and you can see it was up over 20% in this second quarter. Receivables is mostly taxpayers that have requested not to be identified, and it's mostly one time in nature, so it will fluctuate also. So with that, here is the pool forecast. This is showing that second quarter, as Bobby mentioned before, came in down about 0.8%. We had projected that it would come down about 1.5, so it did a little bit better. Going forward, we're looking at the next 2 quarters to still be seeing slowing and then start to step up and get to about 2% growth for fiscal year 24-25. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the business and industry group. This is the group that's getting those gains from that shifting to the in-state fulfillment centers. So this first slide, we're looking at those fulfillment centers. Fulfillment centers are now 26% of the B&I group. These gray columns are showing the dramatic percent growth that occurred in 2020 due to AB 147, and then in 2021 as we saw the shifting to direct reporting. But we also see the gray bars starting to tick up a little bit again in 3Q of 2022. This scale here, if you look, these don't look too big because of these dramatic increases over here, but the top bar is 20% gains. Second quarter of 23 was up 15%. So the in-state fulfillment centers had 15% growth in just second quarter. And this is because new fulfillment centers are opening, and again, the retailers are shifting to in-state fulfillment centers. The trend line up here is showing that it is a general consumer good pattern with that fourth quarter spike with the holidays. So I've talked a lot about fulfillment centers, but the business and industry group has 21 different business types, ranging from industrial to farm equipment to wineries to biotech and to motion pictures. It is a very diverse group. Here are the top 10 business types when we take out fulfillment centers. These top 10 are 62% of business and industry group. The average for this group for second quarter was they were up or they were down about 1%. The largest group right here at the top, the medical biotech group, this was down 7%, with interest rates hurting investing in the medical biotech sector, and the pandemic equipment supply needs are diminishing. There were a few that were up. You can see warehouse and farm equipment was up, as well as office supply and furniture. So some of the considerations for the BNI forecast, of course, with fulfillment centers being 26% of this group now, that's going to have an influence. And again, in second quarter, that was up 15%. And for all of 22-23, it was up 11%. And expecting it to continue to see growth. US manufacturing index contracted for the 10th straight month in August, but the pace of decline continued to slow, suggesting that the sector could be stabilizing at lower levels. This manufacturing index influences the projections for our heavy industry and light industry portions of BNI. Those were the second and third largest categories on that previous slide. So as we're seeing this come in lower, it will affect the overall group. Again, medical biotech is continuing to rebound from those pandemic highs. And lastly, we expect business spending to be on a slowing trend as they conserve cash because of the uncertain outlook and tighter bank lending. So with that, we had the projection for second quarter was only at 1.8, and you can see business and industry came in up 3.3%. So did a little bit better than what we were expecting. We're expecting one more quarter of about 3% growth in third quarter, and then going forward between the 1% and 2% range going out. Okay, now let's look at restaurants and hotels. A few things affecting this group. First is that menu prices are not shooting up anymore. We had 4 quarters where a lot of the growth was attributed to rising menu prices. But in second quarter, menu prices flattened out because consumers were no longer willing to pay any price to eat out like we had been for those previous 4 quarters. Now they're looking for more value in their dining out options. And that's starting to affect foot traffic too. The restaurant industry is very cognitive of when the prices get too high that foot traffic will slow. It did not happen for those 4 quarters, but now they are. So we're starting to see a little bit of slowing in some of the foot traffic. The off-premise opportunities expect to drive industry growth. As I mentioned before, a lot of the off-premise opportunities are through the delivery services, and that's not necessarily going to help this group, the category here. It's going to be reported through the pools. The restaurants are starting to realize that that delivery option is costing them something, and they're trying to pull that revenue back into the restaurant by developing their own online ordering platforms. But that's going to be a slow change. So some of this industry growth that we're expecting to see isn't really going to help this restaurant group. It might help more in the pools. And lastly, a concern for the industry is that the student loan payment resumption will affect some of the willingness to eat out and splurge on dining out. They feel like this will be the industry that is hit first when people start repaying their student loans. So the forecast considerations. First, again, that menu prices are going to remain flat, but they're not going to decline. because operating costs and tight profit margins will prohibit operators from dropping their prices. Second, consumers will be continue to opt for value menus. They're going to continue to eat out, but they're going to be looking for more value in their options, which means fine dining is what is going to slow down a little bit. That's where the foot traffic is going to slow more than some of the other options. And there will be some competition between restaurants. They will be paying attention to what others are offering. And lastly, helping the restaurant and hotel forecast is that hotels and airports still have room for recovery. As Ken mentioned, that there might be fewer flights going out, that is, the fuel is going down, but the flights that are going out are full. There's still lower passenger throughput right now at the airports, and hotels are still below their pre-pandemic level. So both of these areas will allow for room to recover and help. These modest increases will help some of the offset the slowing in this group. So restaurants were previously forecast at about 4%, and it came in at about 3.5%. With those factors that I just mentioned, we're projecting about 3% growth going forward. So again, it will still stay positive. And now I will turn it back over to Bobby to wrap us up here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Susie and Ken, for all that information. Hopefully, as as listeners, you've been able to kind of grab some of the nuggets that, as I mentioned, just earlier this month, we sit around the table, and these are all the ideas that our entire team, the three of us, along with 8 to 10 others that you guys meet with, this is what we share. So hopefully, we've been able to provide you some of that perspective, right? Not just what happened this quarter, what happened a year ago, but then also what we think is coming up. On the screen here, just to put a nice bow on it. 2Q23, second quarter 23, that data which we're going to be coming out and sharing with you, it finishes off fiscal year 22-23. And you can see here, statewide, we ended up 2.1% higher than a year ago, but that perspective, we were in double digits the previous 2 fiscal years. So great perspective there. Yep, we're the expectation, and it kind of is the lead in, right, to the start of fiscal year 23-24. As of right now, we're expecting a bit of a pullback, about 0.5%, 0.6% statewide in 23-24. Then as you look and start thinking longer term, more of a return to the normal, historical growth of somewhere between 2 and 3%. So hopefully that gives you some additional thoughts. We know many of you are going to be closing your books. You're in the process of closing the fiscal year, preparing for your audit. You'll also be looking at preparation of your annual report with that MD&A section and some of the talking points that you might need to provide. Maybe you came in less than 2.1% growth, or even went negative here in fiscal year 22-23. Hopefully pieces of this webinar will, and some of the sound bites you might be able to use within that narrative to just kind of explain what happened. So that's where we ended. That's what we've got, what we think is coming up. For pieces of perspective, because we don't always we're not always perfect. We don't always get our forecast 100% correct, but our commitment to all of our clients is that if we don't get it correct, we're able to identify what happened and why our forecasts were off. 2 quarters ago, 2 quarters ago for fiscal year 22-23, we thought it was going to come in at 3.7, so a full 1.5% higher than what it actually did. And again, these dramatic changes that we've experienced here at the beginning of 23 really are the reasons for that pullback. Yeah, I think we were already, we had been talking about these last couple of quarters of the slowdown coming, and I think we'd all sit here and say, yep, that's this fiscal year 23-24 that we stare right in the face. That is the end of the webinar. Just switching over to the chat. Don't see a whole lot, but if I can, Matt Hawksworth, I see your question there. But before we jump in, today I didn't want to embarrass him earlier in the webinar for fear of it might hurt his presentation, but we are getting a chance to celebrate our colleague Ken Brown has a birthday today. So if you haven't put a question in the chat, feel free to shoot him out a happy birthday, because he decided to come on into the office and present for you guys on his special day. So thank you, everybody. Matt Hawksworth, let me get back to that. With local gas prices, this is in the chat from Matt Hawksworth in Pasadena. Local gas prices now well above $6 a gallon in our area. Is there an economic discussion of a breaking point that forces drivers to reduce consumption, or maybe similar to student loans that simply detracts from all other categories? That's a great thought and a great perspective, right? Because we continue to have this conversation about fuel prices and consumption as it relates to the EV market, right, on autos, and how the fleet is converting over, taking that opportunity. The likelihood is we're going to continue to see gas prices go up as consumption still kind of holds back, and as the market, or the EV market, electronic vehicles, take more of the road usage, that I think we're in the future of $5 to $6 a gallon going forward. Personally, I believe consumers are going to continue to kind of bite the bullet. Really, the downward pressure comes out of global crude oil specifically. So every day, I'm one of those that's one of the first economic indicators that I look at. Hey, what's crude oil doing? How's it going to impact? But to be honest, for what we saw also back during the pandemic, which was $5 and $6 a gallon, yeah, I don't know if there is a true breaking point there, Matt. It I think people got to get around, and they're going to keep buying, just to be able to get to and from work. And maybe the remote and work environment becomes that much more, or an advanced hybrid work environment to help consumers not have to buy as much fuel, especially if it's a negotiating type of uh, factor that as employees you just have to ask for it. That may help consumers more than even global cost of crude oil coming down, because I don't think that's in OPEC's wishes in the near term. Those are my thoughts on oil. Ken, you got any additional thoughts there?
Just I echo that. Just I did hear an interesting podcast yesterday about the inflationary impact of increasing oil prices and gasoline, but the fact is it's just going to reduce a little bit of consumption around the margins elsewhere because people have got to drive, as you pointed out, and so it even has built in an almost anti-inflation impact just because of the impact on consumption in other areas.
Yeah. Additional question came from Marcus Pimentel in the chat. How might your forecast for consumer spending drop be impacted from the threat of $1 trillion of corporate debt at risk from big interest rate increases and some default risk? Yeah, that's definitely taking it one step further. I would say my initial instincts would probably be over on the business and industry side. If we start seeing businesses either default or come into bankruptcy or other financial difficulty, it's going to be on the investment of infrastructure, equipment, office equipment, and the like. That's probably where we would see it first and foremost. We are still, as I made mention, and we saw the slide earlier on unemployment. If we see decreases in workforce staffing because of bigger financial concerns for corporations, I think there's still going to be jobs available out there in the short run, which does mean the likelihood of continued consumer spending. I think we might have to see it on a bigger scale, Marcus, to really feel a more dramatic impact. And I think we'd probably also be talking at that point maybe a bigger pullback light recession territory if we saw that on a national or even global scale. So I think it definitely would. There would be some hints of it, but volume might be the great dictator there of how it would impact the forecast. A lot of happy birthday wishes. Very cool. Thank you guys for indulging on that side. Okay, then Matt, I asked because I'm starting to hear talk about discussions, gas prices, train again. Yeah. Sorry, Matt, just got down to your last comment there. That's the negotiations, right, between staff and management of how to hopefully navigate a higher fuel price environment. All right. So just real quick here. Oops. That did not come across very well. We had a little small embedded video here on the screen, but with no other questions, I'm not seeing any to specifically address. Just a reminder here, go ahead and subscribe via our website. That was the embedded video. Go ahead and subscribe for our newsletter. Blasts out about every month or so. We'll compile a lot of different economic trends and articles to be able to blast out to those that are subscribed. So feel free to subscribe on the website for our news updates. Also, this quarter, be on the lookout for, we're wrapping up our legislative update to kind of summarize all the bills specifically related to sales tax is what you'll likely see there. And there's a couple that are kind of getting ready for the November 24 election cycle that we'll be talking about. And then over here on the right, we'll also be communicating or providing for clients this quarter our rental registration program, all done through our tax and fee administration service. But as more agencies look to, provide some scale and control rent, or just make sure they're staying on top of statistics and data, our rental registration program might be a good fit if you're hearing some of that at a bigger scale. That is about it. Thank you all for all your time this morning. We know that you're extremely busy. Really appreciate you jumping on board to hear the latest trends. As I mentioned earlier, for those of you that are closing your books, good luck with your audit process coming forward. If you need anything, we'll be meeting. I think we've got most of the meetings scheduled already for the next upcoming couple of months to talk about the 2Q results. And then we'll be headed right towards our holiday season. But if you need anything, feel free to reach out. Specifically myself, Ken, and Susie. Our contact information is on the screen. We've also got the rest of the principal team who meets with you regularly. Feel free to reach out with them with any specific questions that you may have. And with that, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.